Okay, guys, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We got a pretty nice full room. So that's awesome. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I'm Kim Raymond. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist at Community Hospice and Health Services within our Health Counseling Department. So today we're talking about dealing with aging and loss, and then also looking at, of course, the caretaker piece. So I just kind of wanted to get a feel for who's in the room. Is anyone currently acting as a caregiver? Okay. And then anyone with kind of previous experience being a caregiver? Okay. All right. Okay, so everyone else is just kind of here to get some info, yeah? Beautiful. All right. So in general, I'm just going to be kind of talking about the importance of balance, especially when you're in the role of a caretaker, looking at different forms of self-care and coping. And then it's either kind of two ways, red flags, or just, I also like to say, kind of being mindful of various stressors. Okay. Okay. So when I'm kind of go both ways, since we've got a mix in the group. So not only when you're acting in the role of a caretaker, obviously a ton of mental, physical, emotional energy is being put into that role. On top of that, there's all these other life transitions and changes and day-to-day stressors that are just kind of naturally part of life. And even if you aren't a caretaker, just some of the different changes that happen, especially as we age. I don't want to read down the list to you guys. Can you see that okay? Okay. So like I said, some of these are health related, physical health changes, mental health changes, just again, family changes. And I think the big thing I want to hit on is when we talk about grief and loss, it's natural for us to think about death loss. But by all means, that is not the only time that we grieve. Anytime we're going through a life transition, we can experience grief and loss. By any chance, has anyone seen the newest Inside Out movie, the animation movie? Okay. So there's this. Love the movies, by the way. They really have a great explanation of just how the brain works. So it's a very, very quick scene. But there's this one scene where the character Joy and the character Sadness are having a small little talk because Joy's going to go to another location, and they're talking about whether Sadness is going to go with her. And Joy just makes a quick comment about wherever I go, you go too. And so that has kind of spurred this discussion, a great discussion, in recognizing that happiness and sadness do very much go hand in hand. Because even during some of our hardest days, if we dig, if we look, we can find something positive, something to be grateful for. But then even in the happiest of times, there can also be an element of sadness because maybe someone's not there, right? Maybe we're excited that we're retiring, but maybe a little sad that phase of life is ending, or we're not going to see those coworkers every day anymore. So just really bear in mind that grief and loss is just, again, a natural part of the human experience that comes with really any form of change. Okay. So, especially as we age and we get into our kind of more golden years, so to speak, this is an additional process that we tend to go through, questioning, kind of who am I? What does my future look like? Again, maybe struggling with any changes that that are occurring with the aging process. What sort of meaning has my life have? Did I do the things I wanted to do? Are there things that I regret or that I feel are missing? And so just briefly, there is someone in the mental health world, kind of a guru from a long time ago, named Eric Erickson. And he came up with these, he says there's 8 stages of psychosocial development. And it basically describes how our personalities develop over time. And it's broken down into different age groups, and within each group, he basically states there's some sort of challenge that we face. So I'm just going to touch on stage 7 and stage 8. So stage 7 is considered middle age, and this ranges from age 30 to 64. And it's called generativity versus stagnation. And this is basically where we're looking at our life and saying, how am I or have I contributed to society? Do I feel like I'm a part of a family, having connection? And again, family does not just mean bloodlines, but just kind of having your own tribe, your own group. The next phase, the last stage, which is 65 and older, he calls integrity versus despair. And that's when we are assessing and kind of making sense about life and just the meaning of our contributions kind of to this world. And so he says, these, in order in general, kind of in order to be a happy, healthy member of society, we have to be able to work through these challenges within each of these phases. So I just kind of think it's kind of good food for thought when we're looking at our development, our aging process, the different things that we're experiencing as we're going along. Okay. So this is obviously just a brief example of some of the physical changes and challenges we might be experiencing. Again, especially if you're in the role of a caregiver, not only are you paying attention to these things for the person you're caring for, but it's also so important to be mindful of what's happening for yourself. It's really common when you're a caregiver to really neglect your own needs, and there oftentimes can be a lot of guilt. I saw it with my own mom when she was caregiving for my dad. She would put off, any sort of medical procedure she needed done, or maybe even opportunities just to kind of go out and, socialize because there's I don't want to leave your dad, or, I got to have someone come and stay, and then just kind of always that feeling of like, I got to hurry up and get back, even if everything was okay. It's just kind of the mental and emotional wear and tear of always thinking about someone else. That plays a role. And then the other thing is, like I said, I know this is talking about physical changes, but I think also keeping in mind the emotional challenges that also come as a caretaker, and that not for everyone and not always, but at times it can be kind of isolating. Again, when your world is revolving around someone else, or maybe just simply for safety reasons, you can't leave that person home alone. It makes it more challenging to step out, even to make a run to the grocery store, go meet a friend for coffee. And by all means, I do see a few familiar faces in here, and I remember I brought this up last time I presented, but I just want to mention it again for the new faces to me in the room, is that when we experience physical pain, the part of the brain that lights up is the same part of the brain that lights up when we experience isolation, loneliness, any form of, feeling socially rejected. Because we are wired as a species to be connected to others. And it comes back to survival. it's pretty interesting, pretty wild, just how much the primitive part of our brain we're actually functioning out of more than our higher parts of the brain. Because at the end of the day, our brain wants to keep human alive. And thousands of years ago, you did not survive if you did not have your group. You couldn't gather enough food, you couldn't protect yourself from predators, you couldn't create shelter if you weren't part of a group. And so for survival reasons, we are wired to connect with others. Now, obviously, our world is very different nowadays, but that part of our brain still operates in the same way. So again, it's just some other things to be mindful of, I think, especially in a caretaker role. Okay. All right. So kind of now taking a turn, diving into, I'd say, the more fun stuff. So just some general tips on, some of these things are going to be like, we hear it all the time, right? Like, make sure you're hydrating, make sure you're eating well, make sure, you're getting sleep. But a couple that I want to hit on is the boundaries. A lot of times we don't necessarily think of boundaries when we think of self-care. And it comes up definitely a lot with grief and even with caretaking. And so there's a couple quotes that I saw that are in regard to boundaries that I was just like, those are really good, that I wanted to read to you guys. And so the first one says, remember, if you're not speaking it, you're storing it, and that gets heavy. That's thinking. We are learning more and more and more in the mental health world. There's been such a focus on the brain, what we're thinking, what we're feeling, but we are learning so much more about how the entire body is involved in the mental health process, and being able to pay attention to, we store memories, we store emotions, not just in our brain, but in our body, and not just traumatic memories in our body as well. So again, there's a variety of reasons as to why sometimes we don't speak up. We say yes even when we're tired or we really don't want to. But we carry that with us. It becomes this weight on us when we are maybe trying to appease others, and not setting boundaries that are going to respect what our needs and our feelings are. The other great quote says, if you avoid conflict to keep the peace, you start a war inside yourself. So with that one, again, it's sometimes we will, this person might react poorly, or, that tends to be a big one. Other reasons as well as to maybe why we don't speak up when we need help, when we need a break, when we need to say no, we can't take something additional on. But then when we do that, especially when we're doing it on a continuous basis, it creates the perfect breeding grounds for resentment. And so that's why, I know it sounds a little cheesy, but it's very true, that when you set boundaries, not only is it for this health and well-being of yourself, but it's also for the health and well-being of your relationship with those other people. So it really is an act of love, both directions. And then I think just another thing, I always like to kind of step back and look at things on a kind of a wider societal level. And in general, as I have all females sitting in front of me right now, in general, in our society, we are taught to pride ourselves on how much can you get done even if you're exhausted, right? And I think that message rings even true for females. you're supposed to pride yourself on being a great wife, a great mom, a great sister, whatever it might be. If even though you're bent over vomiting, but you're still getting kids to school, or you're still going to work, you're still getting this, you're still getting that done. That's what's supposed to make you good, and it's completely toxic. But it creates this breeding grounds for a lot of guilt. And that's why, especially as females, we tend to experience a lot of guilt, which prevents us from setting boundaries, from taking care of ourselves. So, again, just being mindful of that and recognizing, some of these societal messages we get aren't in our best interest, aren't to our well-being, and being able to do what is best for us. Any thoughts or questions so far? I just kind of keep rambling on up here. Okay. So again, kind of like I was talking about, just more food for thought. Again, being okay with asking for help, especially when you look at the caregiver role. It's okay to take a respite break. Again, it's looking at quality time versus quantity. So for example, it's common in a spouse relationship for whoever it is, whether it's the husband, the wife as a caretaker, to feel like they need to constantly be by their spouse's side. And especially if, let's say, they have a terminal diagnosis, maybe they're on hospice support. But I always emphasize that when you are taking care of yourself, when you get some sleep, you get something to eat, you take that break, that allows you to be more mentally and emotionally present with that person, which is going to improve the quality of that time you're having with them, as opposed to kind of being burnt out and just feeling like you're a body in the room. So again, I know for a lot of us, it takes practice. It requires us to step outside of our comfort zone. But really recognizing that, again, I know it sounds cheesy, but it's so true. When you take care of yourself, it does have kind of a bleeding out effect and spill over onto your loved ones. The whole I really see as, I like to sum that up as a reminder to be mindful, because again, we can get so busy in our day to day that it's like, oh, I haven't eaten all day long and it's now 5 o'clock. Or I'm exhausted, or I'm feeling disconnected. My emotional bucket, so to speak, is low. Or just, I'm irritable. Paying attention to, in general, the physical cues your body is giving you in terms of your energy level, those basic needs, hunger, thirst, but then also being mindful of where you're at emotionally. Because I always say feelings are like visitors. They come and go. Some stick around longer than others, but they're never permanent. So, again, just being mindful, kind of, where am I at right now? What's my body cueing me to that maybe I need? So, yeah, we got time. We're going to do it. Okay. I'm going to give you guys some time now, because again, it's so easy to be like, oh, okay, I'll do this later, and then we never go around to it. So we're just going to take advantage now. So I'm going to give you guys this little chart. And what you're going to do is I just want you to think about what are the things that you're currently doing to kind of care for yourself in these 4 different domains, okay? And then just jot down ideas. And then also look at, kind of as you do this, it kind of naturally highlights what are the areas where you feel like, okay, I'm doing pretty good in that area. And what are some areas that are maybe a little neglected? And looking at what are the things you currently do that you want to keep doing, but then below that I have the new ideas to try. So, again, is there something where you're like, oh, I'd love to, try this out or be doing this, but I just haven't made it happen yet. Because again, visual reminders are very helpful. We tend to carry so much around in our head. Give you guys like another minute or two. Okay, looks like you guys are done. Is totally optional. But does anyone have anything that you wrote down on something you want to try that you maybe share and throw out? Sometimes people come up with some really great ideas. Yeah.
I tend to get, like, the emotional side, I tend to get overwhelmed. I tend to get, everyone can tell when I'm like, lose it. So I feel like I think I just start doing like breathing exercises. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's funny because we get told a lot, like, take a deep breath, especially with little kids, right? When they're upset, like, take a deep breath. And it's like, well, there's an actual purpose to it. It's when we do a deep breath, it activates, I kind of call it the brake side of our nervous system, our parasympathetic nervous system, which helps you to kind of rest and digest. So there's an actual biological purpose behind deep breathing. And just a little side note, any type of deep breathing is going to be beneficial, but there's something called diaphragm breathing, or I call it belly breathing. where it's got a little extra added bonus or benefit to it. And it takes some conscious effort at first when you try it, because they say it's kind of like a reverse deep breath, where with traditional deep breathing, when you inhale, everything kind of contracts and pulls in, and then when you exhale, it expands. But with a belly breath, it goes the opposite. So when you inhale, your stomach's going to expand, and then when you exhale, everything contracts. And the benefit is when you do a traditional deep breath, the inhale hits on your gas pedal, your sympathetic nervous system, and then the exhale triggers your brake. Whereas when you do a belly breath, it's all brake that gets triggered. So again, it's just kind of finding what you prefer. So a little something to play around with. Any other ideas? Yeah.
Lately, I've made a conscious effort personally to stay away from news. It's just overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to admit that I was being too, and I just
Yeah, you're not the only person I have heard that from, by all means. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, again, our brains were not built for the amount of stimulation that we now get in this world. And so being mindful of giving my brain a break from, lights, sounds, any form of stimulation. So, yeah, great point. Okay. All right. Okay. So again, just kind of in times of grief, remembering that grief just isn't about sadness. It is, there's no limit, there's no rule around, what that can look like. And again, also being very, very aware that the way you experience grief, not only can it vary from person to person, but even experience to experience. Can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, well, when I lost so-and-so, like I was bawling my eyes out, but now, I've lost this person and I haven't cried once. And they're kind of doing like this, like, what's wrong with me? Like, am I not feeling? Am I not? So keeping in mind is each loss is unique. And so don't judge yourself based on societal ideas, your own beliefs around how you should be reacting or responding. Okay. So, again, some big points to keep in mind as we're aging. Doing something that you enjoy helps you to stay connected. Volunteering tends to be huge. There's a lot of research around volunteering in some form in our older years. And it helps to give us that continued sense of purpose, and it also helps to keep us connected. And the wonderful thing is nowadays there's so many opportunities, so many different places that provide volunteer opportunities. So, it's really looking at, what interests you. And knowing it doesn't have to be some sort of heavy commitment. It can be, even if it's like a once a week, just something that helps to make sure that you're being connected with other people. Again, being mindful of, I say, what fills your bucket. That connection, that love is big. So whether it's with family, friends, pets, it can be fun to do the quiz to see what your love languages are. Has anyone heard of the love languages? Yeah. So in a nutshell, there's 5 big love languages. Let's see if I get them all off the top of my head. There's gifts, There's words of affirmations. That's more of like the I love yous. Thank you so much. I care about you. All those lovely words. There's the acts of service. So that's when someone does something to help you out, maybe take something off your plate. There's physical affection. That's going to drive me nuts. 5. Quality time. There it is. Quality time. So if you literally just type up 5, the number 5, lovelanguages.com, it takes you to the website. And you can, I think there's maybe 30 questions, and it's formatted with a pick the one that stands out more to you. So it'll be like, it means more to me when someone does this versus this. And don't go with your gut instinct. And then you kind of add it up at the bottom. And most people, I feel like, usually have about 2 dominant love languages. And again, keep in mind that they very much can change, and appropriately so as we move through life. So I know for myself, I have 2 boys. I have a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. So acts of service have become a big love language for me. I'm like, yes, take something off my plate. That fills my bucket. That wasn't always the case before. So, but that can also just kind of help to point you in the direction of, okay, what are the things that really speak to me to help to fill my bucket in that way? And also keep in mind that the way you most receive love isn't necessarily the same as how you show it. So it can be helpful to kind of notice that difference as well. That's the other thing. So also thinking about goals. It's very easy, especially in our later years, to feel like, okay, well, now I'm retired now, maybe kids are moved out, but we never stop growing. We always have the ability to further grow, to further change. We've got the science of neuroplasticity to prove that now. And so don't stop setting goals and dreaming for yourself. And it can be small things, it can be big things. And so kind of a great way to look at that is, I say, if you could, take some time to think about, maybe write it out, whatever works for you. What would a perfect day look like for you? And don't think about, well, that's not realistic because of this and this. Just let yourself be free with it. And just, if you could make the perfect day for you, what would that involve? And that can kind of just help to give you a nice little launching point of what is the most important to you right now. And kind of what would those things that you come up with, what would it give you? What would it represent? So for example, if it's on a perfect day, it would be, going on a hike. Well, what would a hike give me? Maybe for me, a hike would give me a sense of adventure and variety. But maybe because I'm a caregiver, that's really hard to do. Well, maybe you can't go out on a hike, but you can still have that feeling of adventure. We just sometimes have to tweak our picture. Okay. So sometimes it's a yes, things that we used to enjoy doing are no longer possible. That doesn't mean that we still can't be fulfilled in that way. We just have to adjust the picture of maybe how we get it or how we make it happen. Okay. Oh my God, this was good. These top 5 regrets. I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Says all the male patients shared this one, as they felt they missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I had let myself be happier. And so going along with that, if you were to go see the doctor today and they told you you had 6 months or less to live, what would you change or do differently? So again, especially kind of going back to that earlier slide where it was talking about kind of assessing our own life and what has it meant to us, what have been our highlights, what have been the challenges, what are any regrets we have. It's looking at, how can I make the best quality of life for myself now, and really kind of paint yourself that picture. Again, our brain processes information differently, whether we read it, write it, speak it, draw it, or even the way we move our body. So again, especially as adults, we tend to do a lot here, right? For stress, we have a problem. It's, okay, let me just think it out, figuring out in my head, I'm talking to myself. It can be helpful to write it out, to even talk to yourself out loud and to physically say it. And the big thing, this is not just for kids, draw it out. And I say mindfully draw it out, which means it's kind of like I say word vomit, right? It's as soon as you get the idea, like, whoop, out it comes and it goes onto the page. You're not analyzing how well you draw. I'm left-handed, I'm supposed to be creative, but that gene missed me. I am not an artist, but I will still fully draw because it's not about what I think. It's just about either processing an emotion or getting my ideas down on paper. And because your brain processes information differently, sometimes you might surprise yourself. You might find that kind of something came to the surface, or you drew something that maybe you didn't quite realize was there. So again, kind of allowing yourself to be creative as you're exploring how can I create the best quality of life for myself with where I'm at right now and with moving forward. Okay. I think that's just a great way to sum it up, is being mindful of doing things that feed your soul. Not putting limits on yourself because we feel like we do this a lot as adults, like, well, that's for kids, or that's for this, or that's I shoulds. The I shoulds are a big red flag word. If you hear yourself saying I should, maybe pay attention to that statement. Don't run away with it. So, any questions, ideas, food for thought? Coming back to the breathing that we were talking about earlier, in connection with that, I think another big thing, if you're not already doing it, to consider is just some form of mindfulness. We're hearing that word more and more. It's really starting to explode in terms of how it benefits us both physically and mentally and emotionally. And again, I think two things to remember with mindfulness so you don't get frustrated is our brains are naturally wired to think. So mindfulness isn't okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to empty my brain and I'm not going to think for like 20 minutes because you're just going to be frustrated. It's not physically possible. That will not happen. It's about turning your attention to the present moment. Again, we think we're present, but we actually spend a ton of time in the past, in the future. Again, in general, us females tend to do a ton of multitasking, which is why I read we actually need more sleep than men. So, thinking about, okay, what am I going to do here after I have this? I have an appointment. That's future thinking. Thinking about what you did this morning. That's past thinking. So really just pulling your attention to the present moment. And mindfulness is even noticing when your mind has wandered and started thinking about something else, being able to bring it back. And there's literally hundreds of different ways that you can do it. And it's not just for when you're feeling stressed out or you're sad. Yes, it's a great coping skill, but it's also good for just helping us to maintain feeling in positive space. So by all means, I know people who they start their day with that. Or if you have a hard time turning off busy brain at night when you climb into bed, it can be a great way to get your brain to just kind of so you can fall asleep. So I'm going to give you guys one right now. Yeah, it's going to be tricky because there's not a ton in here. That's good because it makes it tricky. So we're going to play a little game. So I want you guys to look around the room, and I want you to see if you can find 9 things that are blue. It's a decent amount of blue on here. Okay, I'm going to give you another one. Not going to give you a number this time, but I want you to look around the room and try to find things that have a scent. So even if you can't smell it, but to look at something and to know that it produces a scent. See how many of those you can find.
Everyone make the coffee.
That's a great one.
Everyone loves the smell of coffee.
Okay. All right, now look around and try to find something that has the ability to produce sound. So even if it's pushing a button, moving something, but just things that would produce some form of sound. I'm thinking about soap dispenser, phone, coffee, the hum of the air. Can't quite hear it, but the ticking of the clock. Yeah. Okay. So we did color, we did smell, we did sound. Let's do one more. Final one. Look around and try to see how many things you can find that are circle shaped. Yeah. So again, this was simply bringing your attention to the present moment. Now, kind of the most simplest form of mindfulness is tuning into your breath. I call it having an anchor. Sometimes having something to be an anchor can help us to keep our brain a little bit more focused on the present moment. So the one we just did, I find, because it's more of a game, it's got a challenge element to it, right? Especially when I put a number on it, like try and find 9 of these. It kind of just helps the brain to anchor in and noticing those things. You can do it with anything. I always like to kind of try to touch on some of our major senses. So that's why I gave you something with sound, something with smell. But I mean, it can be, what's something that's sports related. It can be, while you're driving down the road, and I've seen, it's not just for kids, but, kids will be like, let's see how many Teslas we can find or how many trucks we see on the road. That's mindfulness. So, and what I love about it is it gives you the flexibility to kind of do it almost anytime, anywhere, and it's very private, right? It doesn't require you to be in a quiet room. It can be, it's a crazy shift. I'm at work. I'm starting to feel overwhelmed. Well, it's just kind of like a boom, boom, boom that I can do to kind of get me out of that stress head and a little bit more just grounded in the present moment. So, anyway, our next, it's November.
Yeah, this is our last
Yeah.
caregiver.
I just felt myself catch Okay.
We may be in talks of a schedule for next year, if that's something that we want to pursue. I think my boss sent an email out. Okay. Just talk about that. Okay. Perfect. So we'll be in the talks.
Thank you very much. Thank you guys for coming out.